Here are the top 4 risk response strategies. This is one of my favorite topics because when we have a project, risk is all over the place. It is part of every project, part of how we live. And very often we say, oh, there's a risk. We need to mitigate it. So that is just one response strategy. And that actually isn't the correct answer that we should say when we identify risk. So there, I just gave a hint, is the first thing you do when there's a risk is you identify it. Is it even a risk? Or is it perceived? So maybe people are talking about it, but the perception is more than the reality. So it's not even a risk. So stage 1 is you identify the risk. Stage 2 is you analyze it. And you might want to see another blog about analyzing. That's where you use the term PICTA. You analyze the probability, impact, cause, timing, frequency, and alternatives. Now this is that third part, is now that you've done the analysis and you have some information about it, now you can respond. That's when you make the decision to respond. And there's 4 ways you can respond to it. Now these are more about the negative risks, because there's positive risks which you might want to actually endorse and enhance, but by far 90% of the time it's always about, okay, it's a negative impact to us, so what are we going to do in terms of a risk response strategy? Well, let's look at these 4. The first one is the best one, is avoid the risk. What can we do to change something drastically in the project? So it's about changing it so the risk is actually eliminated. Change the scope, change the person doing the work, change the material, or change the equipment. Put up some kind of guard on the equipment. And the risk is avoided. Transfer is a most common because you're transferring it to a third party. Now you got to be careful because that doesn't mean the risk is gone. It's just you've given it to a more specialized area of expertise or a specialized group that is used to handling that risk and very good at not letting it happen. Mitigate is quite common, and essentially it is about lessening the probability and or impact. The PI, probability and or impact, is lessened. So you're not getting rid of it, but you're trying to lessen those parameters. That's mitigation. Here is the baby that I like talking about and nobody does. It's acceptance. Acceptance is the most common risk response that we all follow in a project. But it's the least talked about because people don't like to mention that these risks exist and we're not doing anything about it. Because that's what acceptance is. Acceptance is defined as you do nothing. It's going to happen or it won't. And if it happens, we'll deal with it when it comes. And that is very common because we are always constrained with money, time, resources, equipment. So with all those constraints, we're accepting a ton of risk. So ideally what you do is you document all those acceptance risks, and for the big ones that have maybe a high probability and impact, you want to create a contingency plan. The contingency plan is the backup plan as to if this risk event occurs, then what? So the simplest contingency plan is to say, these 3 people will meet and figure out what should we do. Because ideally, you don't want to be trying to make a lot of decisions after the risk event has occurred because, oh, it's crazy environment, crisis, emergency, so people aren't thinking straight. They won't even know who to invite to the meeting. So do as much of a contingency plan as you can for the acceptance, and that's a good best practice. So there you go, your 4 things to live by in terms of how to respond to risk. Really keep this in your back pocket. It's one of the most important factors of project management, and this essentially turns into a beautiful little spreadsheet that you should be tracking as part of your risk management plan.